All right. So
Good.
everybody that's listening, we greatly appreciate you listening, whether it's on the podcasting sites or whether it's on the radio. We do hope the people that are listening on the podcasting sites do like, subscribe, and share this interview. Again, thank you so much for listening to the program today. We have a very special guest, Dave Tabler, coming to us from Delaware. I would say maybe my third home. I've driven through there many times. I've been calling up radio stations in Delaware for many, many years now and talking sports, politics, and everything else in the kitchen sink. But we do have Dave Tabler. He is a Delawarean now, there since 2010. If you go to davetabler.com, TABLER.com, you can find more about him and also the book, Delaware Before the Railroads, a diamond among the states. Dave, thanks so much for coming on and talking about the great state, the first state, Delaware.
Indeed it is, and indeed it is. Happy to be here with you, Rob.
So let's kick this around and talk about Delaware. I know, depending on what political position you are on the aisle, you'll either like Delaware now or you might hate Delaware. But we're not going to get into that today. We want we want you to give a little bit of the history of Delaware. So let's start with the title of the book. What made you pick this title? Because it does have some significance.
Right. It has a lot of significance. Delaware is very much a state that is shaped by its transportation venues, both in the olden days and right up through till today. So basically, this book is the first in a series of 3 books. The second book is out already. That came out last fall. And that's Delaware from Railways to Freeways. So we have Delaware before the railroads, Delaware's from Railways to Freeways. And then the third book I'm working on right now, which will come out this fall, which will be Delaware from Freeways to E-Ways. So E-Ways kind of harks back to the 1990s when eBay and all these other companies were E this and E that. So it seems like an odd juxtaposition, I think, to a lot of people. What do highways have to do with the internet? But in fact, we have Al Gore to thank for the information superhighway metaphor, and it really is very similar. There's a sense of connectivity that both roads and boats and railroads and the internet all give to people. So that's the long answer.
Right.
Let's see, the first book. All right, let's talk about that for a second. The first book, Delaware Before the Railroads. Delaware, because it's on the bay, Delaware Bay, of course, all of the early cities like Lewis and Newcastle, Dover, they were all right along the waterfront. It took, in the colonial era, let's say around 1780 or so, it took as long to get from Lewis to Philadelphia by boat as it did to get from Lewis across the peninsula by foot. Same amount of time, because it was all swampland and thickets and densely forested and so forth. Very different look than today. So before the railroads, everything had to kind of hover along the coastline. It didn't really make much sense to go too far into the inland because that was the wilds. But as soon as the railways came along, then you had all these cities like Clayton and Harrington, Felton, Marydale. All these cities just sprung up like mushrooms right along the railroad. And then, of course, today with the freeways, we had Route 13 was built back in the 1920s. Route 1 is just now being completely refurbished. In fact, you can go from Philadelphia right down to Rehoboth Beach. There's only one stoplight left. 5 years ago, there were 6 or 7 stoplights. So DelDOT has really done a good job of building out the infrastructure, the road infrastructure here.
I do want to kick this around because just getting into this subject, we know they don't teach much history in the schools anymore. So for the youngsters that are listening, they might be getting a very good lesson of history by either reading your books or also listening to our conversation today. Besides the point, I do want to kick this around because obviously this is a very important topic, but you just moved into Delaware in 2010. Obviously, it's quite a while now as far as you've been a Delawarean. But my question is, what made you want to get really involved in writing the story of Delaware? Because you were obviously living somewhere different before.
That's right. I lived in Brooklyn, New York for about 30 years. And
Oh,
I actually married into Delaware. My wife's family is from Dover. So I've been coming to Dover, Delaware since 1980s, early 1980s. I grew up in Maryland. And as a kid, we would always go to Rehoboth Beach and Bethany
right.
Beach. So, Delaware has just always been part of my landscape, even though it wasn't active. And then in 2010, I was looking to retire, and Delaware is extremely tax friendly, as your listeners probably are very well aware. Um, about a third of the residents in Delaware are over 60. So, I mean,
Wow.
it's just like a magnet for retirement. Well, the lifestyle is
No, it
easy,
makes
the
sense.
taxes are low, the lifestyle's good, the beaches and so forth. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for it. But as I say, I've been coming here for a long time. It was very interesting to me to talk to New Yorkers when I told them that I was retiring here, and Delaware has a very difficult profile out there with other states. New Yorkers look at it and they say, "Yeah, that's where that bridge at the end of the Jersey Turnpike. That's where that bridge is, right?" And or they'll think, "Yeah, there's a tax-free shopping mall right there, right?" Or maybe they know the beaches, but they really don't have a sense of what is it that makes a Delawarean? Like, you think of what is a Texan? You think of the hats and the boots and the big belt buckles. There's a whole mental image that comes to mind, but Delawareans don't have that. We need that.
Just kind of going into millennials and Gen Z. We have some of those people listening. We do have a lot of people in the retirement age that listen to this program also. So a little mix of everything, whether they're listening again on the radio or on the podcasting sites, as far as the youngsters go. Let's talk about that. Obviously, during COVID, we had a lot of work from home. It's still somewhat going on, but a lot of jobs have pushed people more towards working in person. But again, there is still some work from home.
Right.
We were talking off the record and off air, and you spoke to me about millennials and Gen Z moving to Delaware because of the work from home atmosphere that
Yeah.
is very comfortable in Delaware. Talk to the viewers and the listeners a little bit about that, because as I just said, it seems like a lot of these jobs are kind of going back to work, and there is the work from home, but it's not as much as it used to.
So the thing about Delaware's geography is that we are neatly placed right between the Baltimore, Washington area and the Philadelphia area, where a lot of the high-paying jobs that Gen Z and millennials want are going to be. And so if you only have to come into the office twice a week, let's say, that's an hour and a half each way. That's very doable, as opposed to doing that 5 days a week or 6 days a week. So the idea of working at home and living in Delaware suddenly becomes a lot more viable than it did pre-COVID. I think before COVID, there was this sense of it's just too damn long of a commute. But suddenly people looked at it a second time and said, wait a minute, cost of living is great. The lifestyle is good. The amenities are good. The schools are good. Why wouldn't you do it? So yeah, we do see a lot of young people. There's actually a shortage of workers in Delaware right now. We have about 31,000 job openings and only about 21,000 workers to fill it. So the Delaware Business Roundtable is really scratching its head trying to figure out, what do we do to attract the younger people here? Because there's a sense among the older generations in Delaware that we're still perceived as kind of this little backwater. And that was true, 80 or 90 years ago. But as soon as all the bridges, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, the Norfolk Bridge and Tunnel, the Delaware Memorial Bridge, the Cape May Ferry, all of these things give access, very easy access to other geographic areas in the region. And suddenly that just opened the state wide open. It's very much like Long Island up in New York. If you go back to the 50s or 60s, Long Island was just potato farms. It was nothing. And then the LIE got built and the Cross Island Expressway, all of these other, and suddenly you could get out there and you could live on the island and work in the city. And so that same dynamic is what's happening in Delaware right now.
Let's
People are,
talk about the lifestyle difference. You lived in New York. Obviously, that's the hustle and bustle,
right.
fast-paced lifestyle. Delaware, I'm sure, has a little bit about, with that, because it is close to DC and Maryland still. And it is a hop, skip, and a jump from Baltimore, too, as far as Maryland. Well, let's talk about that difference in lifestyle, Dave, from living in Brooklyn, New York, right in the city, to
Right.
living in Delaware, which where you live, it's a heck of a lot different than Brooklyn for sure.
Heck of a lot different. Absolutely. Yeah. So Dover is very much like northern New Jersey suburbs. And in fact, we see a ton of New Jerseyans moving into the Dover area, the Kent County area in general, because it's so similar in lifestyle. You've got the mall, you've got the suburbs, the lay of the land is very similar. For people that really want the hustle and bustle, Wilmington has a lot going on. There's regular concerts and plays and so forth. And I think Wilmington is kind of on an upswing right now. I think it went down in the 70s and 80s, and people are starting to realize, hey, there's a lot going on here that, needs to be a second look taken. Down at the beaches, obviously during the summertime, the beaches are alive with all kinds of activities. But I think even with the retirement communities that have anchored the beaches today, there's still stuff going on down there, even in January and February. You can go to a bookstore reading, for example, in January that you couldn't have gone to 15 years ago.
So you're saying basically the selling point for a young person, millennial to Gen Z, to move to Delaware is obviously the tax issue. As far as raising a family, it's not, you're not gonna, break your leg like you would in New York or
Correct.
Massachusetts or Rhode Island, or the list goes on and on as far as the Northeast.
Yep.
What other selling points would you say besides that raising the family issue would be for millennials to move to Delaware? Go ahead, I'll let you explain. I won't give my input.
That's okay. So I think that the state of Delaware has done a great job on really developing the park system here. We've got tremendous bike trails. There are all kinds of waterways that you can canoe and kayak. There's fishing, all kinds of jet ski water sports, whether that's rivers or whether you want to go out onto the bay and do saltwater kinds of things. So that for people that are really interested in the world of water as a recreational outlet, output, it's a wonderful place to be. But and so if you're raising a kid, the state parks are very inexpensive to go to. They're very well kept. You can go out camping with kids and not break the bank. It's very different from going to, say, Disney World, where you're like, oh my God, we just spent $10,000 for the four of us.
Yeah. Hey, tell me about it. I know the Disney prices. I'm at Disney pretty much 24/7 most of the time, so I know the gist of that. It's gotten to be a scam as far as what's going on there. But that's another story for another day. I just want to end with these last few questions because I think it's important for the audience to know. As far as the books, what do you hope that people, and obviously there is one book that's still being written now, but as far as the two that are in the series out of the three, what do you hope people learn from the two books that have been written as far as that goes?
That history doesn't have to be dull and boring. There are all kinds of exciting stories out there. They just have to be found and told well. And I credit my 8th grade geography teacher, James Jarbo, who was a fantastic storyteller, for getting me involved and getting me excited about history. I think far too many students and people in general, you say, let's talk history, and their eyes kind of roll like, why? Why would I want to do that? But history is just people that lived before us. And just like us, they had quirks, they had foibles, there were good ones, there were bad ones. They all had stories, many of them which are really fascinating. And it's just that most history books, or not most, but many history books don't rise to the challenge of how do you get your audience excited about this topic. So many students feel that it's just rote memorization of this battle and that date and this treaty. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be at all. So I think of myself as a history popularizer. I want people to feel like after they read my materials that is so cool. I didn't know Delaware had this kind of a story or this kind of a back history.
What do you hope viewers and listeners learn from our conversation today?
That I'm not a stuffy guy. Yeah, I mean, historians get kind of this stereotype. People think of us as this tweed-clad, pipe puffing, snooty professor types, and those exist certainly. But the good ones are people that can light a spark and can capture a sense of excitement about history. So that's what I hope people remember about me.
Well, listen, Dave, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on. I hope we can have you on again sometime. Again, for people listening, Dave Tabler, davetabler.com, TABLER.com. And then we hope that you look at the book either on the website or on Amazon. It is Delaware Before the Railroads, A Diamond Among the States. And obviously, we have the second book that's already out. And then the third book is coming out too. We'll have Dave on again to speak about that third book and maybe even get a little bit more on the second book. But Dave, it's always a pleasure to have you on, and thanks so much. And I hope we can do
Absolutely.
this again down the road for sure.
I look forward to it. So the new book comes out in November, so maybe we can do something around that
Yeah, a
time.
little bit before that. Yeah.
Beautiful.
All
All
right,
right.
Dave, we'll speak soon.
Very good.